All right, ladies and gentlemen, the first sticky note on my desk is we're going to talk about property prices, Patrick, because it's been 1 year. We're now April of 2023, and it was really in April 2022 where people were like, "Oh my gosh, I think the market has reached its peak." And actually, we actually found out after the fact that the peak was actually in February, but most people didn't know this. But April 2023 compared to April 2022. Things are changing in the property prices across the country, by the way, in a variety of different averages, which we're going to show some charts. But this is where we're at right now in the real estate market.
Yeah, we went from the world's coming into an end, in terms of prices dropping. Everybody was freaked out. Interest rates, all of the drama that goes into as we shift into that slump. And guess what? It's actually been pretty short lived. We're also are already starting to see a slight tick up. And we have to look at the numbers and say, okay, are we at the bottom? That's the big question that's being asked: is are we at the bottom?
Now we'll talk about bottoms in a second, Patrick. But I want to just recount. And if I wish I could, magically do a replay right here, where you and I were talking about how we were heading into a slump in September and October of the previous year before, like April 2022. It was really in September, October, November of 2021 that you and I were saying, listen, folks, the indicators are not strong enough to support these kinds of property prices. Be very, very careful. Be aware of what's happening in the marketplace. And then we saw the market turn in February, March, and April of last year. But the point is this stuff is predictable, Patrick, when you look at the real market indicators. And you and I, and it's not just you and I, but the Real Estate Investment Network and our research team saw this coming. We had an event showing real estate investors that we had moved from boom to slump, and we called this across the country, in fact.
We did, and it's something that we'll start to hear is that, oh, we must be going back into recovery. It's still too early to say that we're coming into any cycle of recovery. We're still in slump pretty much right across the country, some different versions of it, depending on what province, what particular city that you're looking at investing in. But that's the thing about it, is that a lot of these are being driven by emotion. A lot of the decisions people are making are being driven by emotion. And let's just get back to some realities around this. We're talking to real estate investors primarily on this particular video. So when you're seeing the headlines, you're listening to and hearing all about home buyers and wannabe home buyers, and I can't buy a home buyer, and first time home buyers, and next time home buyers. It's like all about home buyers. This is not the conversation that we're having. I have lots of compassion and empathy for them, but I'm only looking at this and talking about housing and property from the perspective of what does it mean to us as investors. And we have to keep stressing that because it's easy to get caught up in the headlines, JG.
Yeah, 100%, Patrick. So let's look at this chart here, because as you look at this chart, you can really see how January of 2022 was really the peak. And then in February of 2022, there was another rise, but it was in fact March of 2022 where prices ticked down just a little bit. And then we saw a pretty significant drop month over month over month over month over month, up until January of this year. The question you asked a while ago, Patrick, and it's worth debating: is this the bottom or is this a false rally? What are your thoughts?
Well, you know where I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to say it right away. It depends, and it depends regionally and certainly municipally. Is where are you looking at? Because as much as we see these and hear these big drops happening, we know that Toronto and Vancouver are the primary drivers of that in certain areas of Southern Ontario. So when you look at those big number drops, it affects the overall average of the smaller populated areas, and we can go to Western Canada as in Alberta, Saskatchewan. So it all, if you lump it into one big bucket, the numbers look kind of deceiving. They are deceiving. And have we hit the bottom? Again, I'm going to say this. I think in most markets, I think we have. I think that you might see some specific areas where they're going to come down a little bit further.
I'm going to give people a different perspective, Patrick, which is I think talking about the bottom, and I understand why we like to talk about bottoms. It's all the headlines, it's all the news, it's all the pundits out there that like to call the bottom so that they appear to be right. Trying to call a bottom is really stupid, in my opinion, Patrick, because when it comes to real estate, it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. Whether you try to get in at the perfect bottom or not, and I've been saying this since actually the fall of last year, 2022, where I said most of the drop has happened, which is if you're a real estate investor, you should definitely be looking to get back in. Are you going to time the market perfectly? Are you going to get the exact bottom? No, probably not, because that's very difficult. And in fact, it's probably almost impossible. It shouldn't even be an objective for people to catch the bottom. What is important is that those deals that showed up in October, in November, in December, in January, in February, in March, if those are good deals, whether it's at the bottom or not really doesn't matter. A good deal is a good deal. The numbers are the numbers. And as a real estate investor, we're not trying to catch the bottom. We're trying to get a return on investment. And so I'm not a big fan of trying to catch the bottom, Patrick. And I think the bulk of it has happened. I think it actually happened in fall of 2022.
That's a really good point, by the way, Gigi. We have to look at the wording and the language that we use of saying the bottom. I'm looking at it, when I'm talking about the bottom, if I'm investing in a market and I'm looking at a piece of property, I'm doing the math, and does the math make sense, yes or no? The question I'm asking myself, do I see further downside of this particular area? And that's one question I might ask myself, but I'm investing, depending on the strategy, I'm assuming that I'm going to invest in a buy and hold, and that I'm not, trying to flip that property for appreciation in a year or two. Yes, I'm looking, is there more downside? Do I want to wait because I think there's going to be more downsides because I want to pick that up at the end of the game? But ultimately, that's a good point. We're not looking for the bottom. We're actually looking and saying, what is it going to return in the future, depending on the strategy I'm using?
Now, a couple other things I want to point out here, Patrick. You're looking at this chart here where the MLS home price index, and this particular chart shows year over year percentage change. And this is the kind of chart the media loves to use, this kind of chart, because it shows a huge decline. And the reason it does that, Patrick, and we really got to break down this chart, because if you take this chart and if you understand it logically, you're going to see that in the next month and 2 months and 3 months and 4 months, this chart is about to reverse and going to start going back up. And the reason for that is because when you look at year over year percentage changes, they're often, first of all, very misleading. They're very, very challenging to understand. And that's because you're looking at a couple numbers. You're looking at the base effect of what the number's being compared to, and you're looking at the current market today. And when you look at a chart like this, it looks super scary. And these kinds of charts keep investors out of the market when, in fact, this is the kind of chart you want to look at and say, listen, let me break this down and let me understand these numbers without just reacting to the sharp decline, right, Patrick?
It is. And I mean, certainly when you come from a peak to where it's come down, it looks very dramatic. The other thing we have to just shine a light on when you look at HPI is that it is very lagging. So we also have to keep that in mind. So let's go back to what we consider when we look at real estate is, we're looking at what is happening economically, what's happening with the region. We're talking lots about supply and demand. We're talking about the influencers called, for example, politics and interest rates. We can't step over the fundamentals around the health of an economy, the population growth. So when we see this, it is, to your point, dramatic. It drives emotion, and that emotion will often make people make bad decisions, like sitting on the sidelines at a time where this, in terms of growing net worth and growing a portfolio, this is where opportunities exist, and you have to look at the numbers for what they are.
And if you consider those economics, Patrick, you just talked about, just without getting, because I know we're going to talk about a rapid fire economics. I have a sticky note right here on my desk to discuss it, but I do want to talk about just the supply and demand alone. If you look, we are currently at a 20-year low for supply, 20-year low in terms of properties coming onto the market. And on the flip side of that, you have I forget how many year high, maybe a 20-year high, maybe an all-time high in terms of immigration and people coming into the country. So you have this massive strain on the housing market where you have huge demand and very, very low supply. Where do you think prices go when you have a high demand and low supply? You don't have to be an economic superpower to figure that out. It means prices will eventually go higher. Whether it happens this month or next month, I can't tell you. And quite frankly, I don't care. What I could tell you is it's going in the right direction.
But yeah, and let's not just even, we have to expand off of supply and demand. It's not just supply and demand. It's the economic health. And although Canada seems to be, and they look into the future, they're talking about soft landing. And, at this point, nobody's seeing a technical recession. Now, I want to just one light I want to shine on something called recession. What is a recession? We talk about technical recessions and negative GDP growth. Nobody's seeing that into the future. I still am not even looking at the leading indicators seeing that. I'm not seeing it yet. Am I seeing softening? 100%. JG, we talked about at the RAIN meeting where we talked about business and where businesses are going, and they're nervous because of lending and because of a potential slowdown. But having said that, none of it is bad news. So we're not looking at just supply and demand. We're also looking at the economic health of the country overall, and it looks pretty positive. So when we consider that interest rates, man, we can talk about it shortly, but TIF, I don't see TIF going any higher. Maybe he'll hold, but I don't see him going any higher. So we even see the influencers changing. So when we look at the economic health of Canada overall, specific regions, we look at housing, and as much as it's talked about, and there's a lot of conversations about affordability, and it's not fair, and they're never going to get this cut. Like, there's a lot of that noise. Just get back to what it is. And this is an opportunity. Again, we talk about it from a real estate investor's point of view. This is an opportunity to employ strategies that work in this market.
Property prices covered. Not bad. I got good aim today.
If you like what you learned here, go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.
If you want to see more stuff like this, click here. If you want to see the entire show, click there.